Hi, I'm Novell J. Lee, and today's episode of The Buzz breaks from tradition from our regular features, but it is an important topic to discuss. I had the pleasure of sitting down and speaking with the contributor to Rolling Stone, as well as the creator and host of the true crime podcast, The Devil's Quarry. Paul Solotaroff and I discussed the murder of Josette Wright, which took place in October 1994, as well as the wrongful conviction of Anthony DiPippo. As the conversation progressed, you will understand as the audience why we need a collective hell no in order for a sexual predator to not be released from prison earlier than anticipated. Viewer and listening discretion is advised.
Welcome to BuzzWorthy Radio. Here's your host, Novell J. Lee.
We have someone here on the Buzz today that is, in my mind, a complete and utter genius with what he does. I am so honored to welcome this man here who has the podcast, The Devil's Quarry, which is premiering this Wednesday, June 10th, as an official selection at the Tribeca Festival. He is also a contributor to Rolling Stone, as well as a former writer. I'm not sure if he's still writing for this, Men's Journal.
That was years ago. Does Men's Journal still live and breathe? That's the better forensic question.
That is a good question. Paul Solotaroff is joining me right now. It's a pleasure. Thank you for taking time out of your day to do this with me. I listened to the entire season of The Devil's Quarry. And when I say that, we mentioned before this, guys, that I may have been yelling at a screen for a certain game that may be on. That's not why I was yelling. I think I was yelling because of this show. And it was just as episodes progressed, the more angrier I got.
Mm-hmm.
So I was listening on the train, I was listening in the car, driving back home, and luckily enough, in my car, it was just by myself. So there were a lot of expletives that were voiced. More so than the expletives that you had in the podcast itself. So I applauded myself that I was actually cursing more than they were because of everything that transpired throughout all of this. And a little background on this. So this is about 32 years ago.
Exactly.
Josette Wright went missing, was found murdered. There was a man, Anthony DiPippo, who was sentenced to prison for over 2 decades.
Right.
He had 3 separate trials. The third and final one, 10 years ago, he was acquitted. And I kind of agreed with him. I'm not in a sense agreed with him, but I felt that my tone was similar to his tone, that when he was acquitted, it was just a sense of numbness for me, as well as obviously for him, because he couldn't believe it that he was released. And he felt that there was no way that this was real and something could happen to where this was probably a falsehood, and then I'm going to go right back into prison. And I sat there with him and I completely agreed with him, saying, I'm shocked as well that it took up until this point for you to be released. And that I don't know how to sit with this. I don't know how to sit with everything that transpired to get to this point.
Beautifully framed. So I come into this story, Novell, as someone who has been chasing crooked cops, corrupt prosecutors, and in-the-bag judges for 37 years. I started the Village Voice in 1988, fresh out of the clinical psych program at NYU, thinking I was going to be a therapist, until I actually had my own patients and realized I needed much more help than they did. And this was not going to redound to their benefit. For 37 years, I have been giving names and voices to the nameless and voiceless. I have been interrogating injustice in the most horrific cases. You've seen some of my shows, Aaron Hernandez, That's My Story, How to Fix a Drug Scandal. I got the rapper Meek Mill out of prison. I am an old hand at interrogating police corruption in big cities. What took me to Putnam County, which for all its hickness, which for all of its cultural backwardness, is just 50 miles north of the Bronx. But is one of those white flight communities that essentially formed out of nothing in the 1970s when New York City began building all of these, what we call projects, and scared all of the white people in Queens, East Bronx, north to Putnam County, where you could buy or build a house for $35,000 on a lake. Long story short, it's the kind of place where the policing is unimaginably bad. It is the kickouts from big city police departments, or it's cops whose real calling is getting on their knee at a floor shine and saying over and over again, "May I show you something in a blue suede pump mat?" Instead, these two cops with no formal training, with no acquaintance with the U.S. Constitution, didn't know what Brady material was, didn't know what impeachment evidence was, stumbled upon a crime scene on November 25th, 1995, found the remains, well, two hunters found the remains of this beautiful 12-year-old child, Josette Wright, who had gone missing 13 months earlier in October of 94. Josette was not runaway, she was a walkaway. She was one of these kids who was so unhappy at home, she would walk the streets of small town Carmel at 11, 12 at night by herself. And she was the very definition of a vulnerable target. She was acquainted with a man who had a long, horrible history of drug assaults on children, not drug assaults, I'm sorry, of sexual assaults on children, who was known to the entire law enforcement community in Putnam County. So it's the sheriff's office that investigated this case, but there are all these small town police departments. None of them know what the fuck they're doing.
Yeah.
They wound up stumbling upon the obvious handiwork, Novell, of a practiced sadist, a veteran woodsman, and a really accomplished binder and torturer. So all the markings on the remains of Josette Wright, she was under light ground cover, were the obvious handiwork of someone who had either done this before or was most certainly going to do it again. That is to say, someone who had been working up to this level of violence. And instead of pursuing the town pedophile, the guy who had been in trouble with the Putnam County Sheriff's Department, the Carmel PD, the Kent PD, the Brewster PD for more than a decade, who had a sexual assault on his a conviction for sexual assault on his sheet, they went after the two stoner kids in town they disliked the most. So they pick up a kid who was 17 and a kid who was 16 who could not have found the body, let alone murdered her, tied her up in such a sophisticated way that the rope that bound her neck to her hands behind her was also tied around one of her ankles so that if she had tried to kick out or free at least one of her legs, she would have strangled herself.
Oh my God.
And the woods in which he was found are so impassable, are so impenetrable for thickers and storms, stickers and thorns, nettles, and creeks that run out of under your feet. The story that was told about these two young men was that they raped this girl in a van near the woods, somehow portaged her body deep into the woods, and buried her under this light ground cover such that she wasn't discovered for 13 months, and then got back to the van in 15 minutes with no mud on their shoes, no
There's no stickers on them. There's no thorns on them. There's nothing on them.
And the And the master detail, there was no ambient light. So there was no moon out that night. It was the rare night in 1994 when there was no moon whatsoever. And this was on a pass-through road with no houses, no street lights. So absolutely no source of light, including the van they were allegedly in which the dome light and the dashboard lights were broken. So somehow this perjurer, the state witness who put the crime on these two boys who were drug friends of hers, she was allowed to tell this extraordinarily transparent series of lies on the stand at two murder trials in 1997. So these two best friends, Anthony DiPippo, who by the time of trial was 18, Andy Krivak, who by the time of trial was 17, and they were all part of this slacker, stoner, dropout culture together. And what had clearly been done was that these two cops had so bullied, so coerced, so menaced this small group of very vulnerable kids into essentially becoming a circular firing squad, that the case, with no forensic evidence, no physical evidence, no fibers, no hair, no blood, God knows no DNA, nonetheless went to juries, and a jury came back within hours in both cases. So Anthony, who at 18 looked and talked like an underground wrestler, 6'5", 260, he goes up to Dannemora. He goes up to Attica wearing the worst jacket a perp can wear. Pedophile, rapist, murderer of a 12-year-old girl. And somehow not only manages to survive cell block D, he finds his way to the prison library and teaches himself first to read. He was a 9th grade dropout. And then teaches himself the law in such a sophisticated and compelling way that he winds up not only solving his own case, but we believe also solving the murder of a second girl who the audience will meet in season 2 of Bone Valley.
So, all right. Now, I gotta admit, true crime is the love of my life when it comes to podcasts. Even though I'm an entertainment podcaster, what I listen to is true crime. And when I was diving headfirst into this, and the first thing that, aside from everything that you mentioned, that made me start dropping expletives was when we get to the part where in 1999, how you tossed out DNA evidence, number one. That, are you freaking kidding me right now?
Well, let's set the context. So another girl gets raped the summer of 94. This is all happening within 6-7 months. And all these girls, the Josette Wright, the second missing girl in Carmel, Robin Murphy, and then a third girl, all of whom knew each other, were about 3-4 years apart in age.
Right.
The third girl gets raped 2 months before, brutally raped, ambushed, raped, sodomized on the lawns of 3 different neighbors by this monster. All the same person, by the way. And the cops all knew this person. When she immediately ignores the death threat from this assailant and reports the rape immediately, not only reports the rape, hands over the rape clothing, the semen-stained T-shirt, shorts, and underwear that, by the way, he stuffed down her mouth. Again, criminal signature, same every single time.
Same MO.
Same MO, same fetish, right? It wasn't enough for him to violate these women. He had to humiliate them with their own underwear down their throats, right? So you have the most screamingly obvious tell. And the cop who took not only her rape kit, who not only took possession of her rape clothes and her statement, tosses out every stitch of evidence, including the lab results on DNA, including the rape clothing. He forgot to shred her statement. So we have that. But what you have are these 3 young women all screaming out who this man is and what he is doing to the girls of Putnam County. And yet there seems to be this kind of tacit agreement amongst the sheriff's department and these local small town police departments. That dude is ours. He's off limits. Do not touch him.
Yeah.
What our series is about in part is getting to the bottom of what this predator had on the law enforcement community in Putnam County to not only commit one horrific crime after another, but then walk at his leisure to the next county over and set up and do it again.
And do it again. That led into my next part, because then what you just said also was a call out to me, was when they did the interviews, one of which was with Bill Quick. And the question was, did you investigate anyone else besides Anthony and Andy? And his response to that was, I don't think so. I don't think so. I think not. Something to that effect. Basically, he
said no. In fact, he said he was ordered to look at nobody else but these two young men. And he threw his boss, Under Sheriff, what's his first name? Turner, under the bus. So what happens is Anthony gets out in 2016, immediately turns around and sues Putnam County, sues the two cops, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And instead of settling quietly out of court, Putnam fights him for 3 years. This is how stupid Putnam County's officials are. What that allows Anthony and his lawyers to do is get taped video confessions from each of the cops, in which they all but raise their hand and say, yes, I committed abominable police misconduct. Yes, I violated every constitutional right these boys had, including they never were Mirandized. They weren't allowed to call a parent. They weren't allowed to use the John. You know, there are ways to extort coerced confessions from children. And one of them is to cut off all contact with people they know and trust. And that happened not only with Anthony and Andy, but the one witness who puts this horrific crime on them, a young woman named Denise Rose. She was not allowed to call her parents, blah, blah, blah. So what Anthony did so brilliantly was collect overwhelming evidence of a coordinated cover-up by Putnam County law enforcement and district attorney's office. The DA is not blameless in this, very far from it. They engaged in acts of witness tampering, of subornation and coaching perjury. So one of the reasons I had to come back to this story, Novell, was, first of all, this man is getting a walk. He is leaving prison
next year, right? Next year.
Maybe as soon as this December. At the outside, it'll be January of 27, but the Connecticut Department of Corrections keeps moving up his release date. And let me say that release comes with no strings. So no parole, no
strings,
no official supervision whatsoever. They are going to release a man into the wild, and that man has, from the age of 12, been living off the grid in a tent. Through winter, he has been living on what he catches, kills, or steals. And it's certainly assuring to know that he'll have to register as a sex predator, as a sex offender. But who's going to get the notification? The deer, the squirrel, the woodpecker, the chipmunks. So there is a ticking clock, Novell, that is hanging over all of us. We desperately need to see justice done, not only for the families of these two one murdered, one missing, presumed dead young women in the town of Carmel, New York, but also keeping a public menace off the streets or out of the tree lines of Putnam County and New Fairfield, Connecticut.
That just goes right back to what you had just said, which I'm also questioning myself, is what is it that this predator has on these people? And in the police department in order for them to basically be ordered not to even look at this man. And no one seems to have an answer for that. There's no answers. Even Mark Agnifilo is also sitting there with that question. And he himself is going, this is, in my mind, how I took it from when I listened to him, this is completely going insane in my mind that no one's talking. There's nothing being said. And I can't figure out why this man is going to hopefully not walk, but he's going to walk.
Well, not if we have anything to do with it, Nobel, and not if people like you, not if your listeners, our listeners, create the kind of enormous upswell of hell no over our dead bodies. Is this man walking out of Cheshire Correctional in December of 2026? Dude, I could go on for hours with you. You're awesome. It is such a pleasure. I would love to continue the conversation offline, or
Love to. Absolutely.
please make sure that Nathaniel has your information. I would be delighted to go on talking, and next time I'm in town to have a drink with you. You in the city?
I'm about 2 hours away from the city, but I can easily get into the city quickly.
Right.
So, yeah.
Wonderful. All right, friend. Well, it's an honor and a privilege.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning in to The Buzz. Catch all episodes on Spotify. Remember to like and subscribe. Visit buzzworthyradiocast.com.